In this video, I'm going to show you how I made a selection of mugs using the pinching technique. Each of the mugs is a little bit different. They've got different design features, different shapes and sizes, but they're all using the same basic technique. If you like the video, do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, then you'll get a notification when I upload a new video. And the first mug that I'm going to make is this one. To make this mug, you start off with a ball of clay about the size of an orange, nice round ball of clay, and then supporting it in one hand, you press your thumb into it until it's almost touching the other side. I would leave a thickness of about maybe 1/3 of an inch, so you'll be able to feel it through the tip of your thumb, and the palm of your other hand you'll be able to feel when the thumb is getting close to the other side of the clay. Don't push your thumb right the way through. Like I say, about 1/3 of an inch I would say to start off with, and then just slowly using your finger and thumb just start pinching the clay out, supporting it with one hand and pinching around like that with flat fingers rather than pinching with the tips of your fingers. You don't want to pinch with the tips of your fingers. You want to keep your fingers relatively flat. Because otherwise, if you just pinch with the tips of your fingers, it's not actually going to squeeze the clay upwards, which is what you want to do. You'll just end up with a ridge at the bottom of the clay where your fingertips have been pinching. So just keep pinching around, and if you notice that any little sections of the clay on the top rim start cracking, just smooth it out as you go. If you don't smooth out the cracks as they appear, they can open up and become a bit larger later on. So it's best to just sort them out as they appear. And like I say, just keep slow, even pinches all the way around and try to make sure that the sides of the clay stay of an even thickness. So gradually working your way around. It's best to use clay that's quite soft and pliable, because otherwise it's quite tough on your wrists and on your fingers, but also the clay will crack if it's too dry. So by the time you've pinched the clay out so that the sides of the clay are about this thin, the actual bowl itself it'll be quite sort of floppy and soft. So it's best to leave it overnight to firm up so that it becomes not leather hard, but a lot firmer to handle. And if I made this into a mug now, it would be a relatively shallow mug. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of height to the clay bowl. And I do that first by measuring out the length of the diameter of the rim. And the way I do this is I use a piece of string. I just wrap a piece of string around the top of the rim and then mark it out where it joins. Cut the string to length. And then the actual diameter of the rim is going to be slightly smaller than that cut piece of string, so I just drape it along the top. I've never seen anyone else doing it this way. This is just the way I do it. So draping the piece of string around the top and then cutting it exactly to length. And what you have there is a piece of string that's the exact diameter of the bowl. And then I roll out a slab of clay. I'm rolling a slab of clay out on a piece of fabric there so that it doesn't stick to the table. It's easy to peel off the surface once it's been rolled out. And I rolled it out, it's I would say about 1 centimetre thick, maybe 1/2 inch. Then using the piece of string that I cut to length, I mark out the length of the string on the slab of clay. And then with a ruler, I'm cutting a length of clay that's exactly the width of the mug as it stands. And really what I'm doing here is I'm just making a slab of clay that's going to be about 1/2 inch thick, that's going to be the right length to fit around the top of the mug, and is going to add about 1 inch of height to the mug. So as you can see, I'm going to cut out about, actually it's probably about an inch and a half of clay the strip is 1.5 inches, the slab is 1.5 inches deep. So then I use a serrated rib tool to put some texture onto the ends of each end of the slab. And this is called slip and score, the slip and score or score and slip method. You basically use a serrated rib, or you can use a fork if you like it, just a kitchen fork, to rough up the edges, and then paint a bit of clay slip, which is just water and clay, onto the ends of the clay slab, and then press them together firmly and blend the clay in together, so you're making one ring of clay that's really well joined together at the ends. Blend it in really well. And then do the same thing, just score onto the top edge of the clay mug and onto the underside of the clay ring slab that you've just made. Paint a bit of slip on. And then put the clay slab on top of the mug that you made earlier. And then you just have to compress the slab onto the existing mug quite firmly. The clay is quite different. The clay in the bottom is relatively firm and hard because it's been left overnight, and the clay on top is quite soft. So you just have to make sure that it's attached really well, so that it doesn't separate when it dries. And one of the ways to do that is to just blend the clay in really well with a wooden modelling tool like this. Do it on the outside and on the inside. You've got to blend it in on both surfaces to make sure that the strip on the top is really well attached, really firmly attached. And then when it's really firmly attached, blend it, tidy it up with it a little bit with your thumb to get rid of as much of that rough texture as you can. And then when it's joined and blended on nicely, then you can start pinching up the additional slab that you've joined onto the mug, so that it's the same thickness as the mug underneath, the piece of mug that's underneath. And you might find that the cup will kind of flare out a bit and get a bit wider than you want it to be, so you can rectify that by just turning the mug upside down like that, and then just squeezing it together with your hands, and it'll reshape the clay so it makes it into a nicer shape. And then when you're happy with the shape of the mug, best thing to do is actually put a reinforcing strip around the outside of the mug too, just to make sure that that join is really secure. Because if you're going to be drinking a hot drink out of the mug, you want to make sure that it's not going to break or crack. So I just put a strip of clay around the outside and blend it on. It looks a bit bulky and a bit ugly at the moment, but you will tidy it up. So I'm just peeling off a bit of the excess clay there from the outside with my thumb, and then just using that wooden modelling tool again to blend in the coil of clay. And then once the coil of clay has been blended in and smoothed out, and you're reasonably happy with the shape of the mug, you can leave it overnight, just to make sure that the clay is really bonded together well and both parts of the mug are about the same moisture level. And this is a platter tool, it's by Mud Tools, and it's really handy for just tidying up the inside of the mug, just scraping away some of those lumps and bumps from the inside, tidy it up and so it's nice and smooth. And then on the outside I just use this is called a shore form. You can buy shredding tools that are specifically made for shredding pottery clay and smoothing out the surfaces on pottery clay, but this is just from a local hardware store. It's called a shore form, and you just use it to shred away the uneven surface that's on the outside of the mug, and also to take away some of the thickness, because at the moment the cup's quite bulky. And then I've just shredded off a bit on the base there, just because I'm thinking about trying to make a bottom to the mug that's going to stand well on the table surface. And then once you've tidied up the outside, I'm just shaping the rim there a little bit, and also I'm just using the shredder here just to take away some of the thickness of the lip of the mug, because it's a bit chunky at the moment and it doesn't look very elegant. So just shred away some of that bulk, and then using my thumbs I'm just smoothing out the inside rim of the lip. And then I tidy up the outside of the mug using a metal rib tool. You can take away, the shredder will leave a serrated texture on the mug, so you just need to scrape away that texture using the metal rib tool. All the way around and on the base. And then I use a rubber rib, a soft rubber rib, just to compress the clay and to smooth out any little nicks and marks that have been left by the metal rib. And the rubber rib is really nice for making a really smooth, lovely surface on the clay. And I do the same on the rim of the mug too, just to make it nice and smooth. And then when I'm happy with it, what I do is I put it the right way up, and I use a spirit level just to check how level the rim of the mug is. If it's not level, what I do is I just shave a little bit extra off with the shredding tool, and then check it again with the spirit level until I'm happy that the mug is sitting, is an even height on the top. It can be quite difficult to get a level lip on a hand-built pot, but I find a spirit level does help. And then I'm just patting the base of the mug there with a wooden paddle, just to make the base a little bit wider so the mug will sit more steadily on the table. And then just tidying it up again with the rubber rib. And then this is a damp piece of chamois leather, which I'm just running around the top edge of the mug to really make sure it's nice and smooth, so that it's nice to drink out of, so that there isn't any little burrs or sharp edges around the rim. And now I'm going to make a handle for the mug, and I do that by taking a lump of clay that is and I shape it into what looks like a sweet potato or a carrot, and hold it in one hand, the fat end in one hand, and then squeeze the other end with your other hand to make it into a longer shape. And then what you do is you wet your hand in a bowl of water, and then you just pull your hand over the elongated piece of clay, and it looks a bit like, everyone says it looks a bit like milking a cow, which of course it does look a bit like milking a cow. And you just keep turning the clay and running your hand over the long strip of clay that's getting longer and longer each time this is called pulling a handle, and because really you are just pulling the clay out. It's important to remember to keep turning the clay in the supporting hand, so that you're making a nice a nice circle shape, so it's an even circle shape. But you don't want your handle to be a circle, because if your handle is a circle, it'll feel quite uncomfortable to hold when it's on the mug. So once you're happy with the length and the thickness, then just use your hand to thin it out to make it into a strip. You can see there that that's really a strip of clay rather than a circle of clay. So just keep pulling it until it's about the right thickness and length for your particular mug. Then when you're happy with it, you can just pinch it off and then put it onto a wooden bat, or a plate would be fine as well. And you'll see I'm curling it onto the wooden bat as well into a handle shape, so that it becomes almost leather hard overnight in that handle shape rather than flat. So the next day, when the handle is much more, it'll be much more easy to hold because the clay will have firmed up. You can mark it and cut it to length like that, and then position it on the mug where you want it to be attached. You can see there that the clay is bending, so it's not completely leather hard, but it's definitely not soft like it was when I originally made the handle. So then with the needle tool, I just mark each side of where the handle's going to go. And then take the handle away, and then using the serrated rib or your fork or whatever rough surface you're using, scratch into the mug where the handle is going to be attached and score into it really quite well, because it's very important, as obviously, that the handle stays in place, and score both ends of the handle too. Put a good amount of slip on there on both sides, and then press the handle firmly onto the mug. Now, if you put one hand on the inside when you press, so that you don't the mug doesn't the shape of the mug doesn't get distorted. And then once you've pressed it on firmly, I make a very small coil of clay, which I'm going to use to really firmly attach the handle. So press it around the join where the handle is meeting the mug. And then just press it in with your thumbs, press it into the join with your thumbs, being careful not to push the handle off the mug, because it's still not fixed firmly, it hasn't dried in place yet. That slip hasn't bonded it together completely yet. So press that coil of clay in, and then blend it in with your fingers. I use a mixture of my fingers and a really small wooden tool as well, wooden modelling tool. So once I've used my fingers and thumb to just blend that clay in, and I'll tidy it up a bit with the tiny little wooden modelling tool. And this, just repeat the same process with the lower part of the handle too. And I just do this really to make sure that the handle is very firmly attached to the mug. And I quite like the way it looks as well. I quite like the smooth join between the mug and the handle. I think it looks quite nicely finished when it's done. And then once it's all blended in, again I just use that damp chamois leather just to take away any marks that have been left by the modelling tool. And then that's more or less it. I let it, once it's all nice and smooth and finished, I let it dry, and it's fired, bisque fired and then glaze fired, and that is the finished mug once it's been glazed. This is a similar, I made this mug in exactly the same way. The only difference actually is that it's got a foot ring attached to it. And in the next section I'm going to show you how to make and attach a foot ring, but I'm going to show you how to do it using another way of making a pinch pot mug, which is using a cylinder of clay instead. These two mugs were made using a cylinder of clay, still using the pinch pot method, but you started off with using a different technique. So starting off with a roll of clay, which I tap and roll into a shape that's a bit like a cork, a large cork that you'd find coming out of a bottle, or perhaps like a big marshmallow shape. It's a roll of clay with flat ends that's tapered at one end so that it's slightly fatter at one end than the other. And the reason for doing that is because I like the mugs to either have a wider rim or a wider base. If you want a mug that just goes straight up and down, then you can just make a cylinder of clay that's not tapered. So then once you've got the right size, you push a pencil, or in this case it's a paintbrush, right through the centre of the marshmallow shape, making sure that it comes out the middle of the other side too, so it's going straight through the middle rather than at a wonky angle. Push it right through, and then just wiggle the pen or the paintbrush around a bit. So what you're trying to do is you're just trying to open up the hole that's going through the middle of the cylinder, because eventually what you want to do is you want to get your thumb into the cylinder and start pinching it out. And the best way to do that is just wiggle that paintbrush around, and then I start off by just putting my little finger in there and trying to open it up, and then eventually you'll be able to get your thumb in there and start pinching out that clay into a nice cylinder shape. So yeah, you just start pinching the clay, turning the tube of clay around and pinching it with even pressure all the way around, trying to make sure that the walls of the cylinder are of an equal thickness. And then what I do is I pinch it at one end and then turn it around and then pinch it at the other end, so that you don't end up with a tube with one end of clay that's very thick and fat and the other end is starting to thin out too much. It's good to try and keep them equal. And just repeat that process of pinching the clay, thinning it out, turning it round, and then pinching the other end. Until you end up with a much more open cylinder of clay. And as you pinch it, the clay does become quite soft. That cylinder will become quite soft, so it helps to put it on a shallow banding wheel so that you can turn it and pinch it quite easily. So you can see that one end of the cylinder is wider than the other, and you can either have the wide end of the cylinder at the base of the mug, which gives it a tankard shape, or you can have it at the top, which gives it a more kind of classical mug shape. So the one on the left is the mug shape, and that one that I'm holding there is a tankard. Now what I'm doing here is I'm just rolling out a piece of clay that's going to be the base of both of the mugs. So I'm rolling it out to the thickness, a thickness that's going to match the thickness of the wall of the mug. So it's about, I would say, about 1/4 of an inch thick. And then I just use a smooth, soft rubber rib to compress the clay down. Now that's the tankard shaped mug, so I'm going to mark out, just lightly mark out with a needle tool, the size of the clay that I need. And because it's the tankard one, the clay is going to go on the wider end of the cylinder. And this is the other mug, which is going to have the narrow end at the base of the mug. So I'm doing exactly the same thing, just marking out with a needle tool lightly where I want to cut it out, and then do exactly that, just using the needle tool, just running it around the marked area and cutting out a circle of clay that's going to be the right size for the base of the mug. And there you can see it fits quite nicely in place. And then before I attach the base, what I do is I just tidy up the outside of the cylinder using the shredding tool again, just to get rid of the finger marks and the lumps and bumps. You don't have to do that. I mean, you can just leave it with the ridges on. It can look quite nice, but I quite like a nice smooth finish. So once it's shredded, I just repeat the process that I showed you earlier on, where I'm removing those serrated marks from the shredding tool with a metal rib, and then just compressing down the clay and smoothing it out with a soft rubber rib. And then I am scoring into the base around the edge where it's going to join the mug, and scoring the bottom edge of the mug too. Painting a bit of slip on. It's the same joining process. And then making sure it's really nice and firmly attached. Then blending the clay in. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the base of this mug. I'm going to make a small coil of clay, flatten the clay coil out, and then I'm going to press it around that join, just to make sure that that join's really firmly attached. Blend the clay coil in. And then when it's all blended in and on nicely, then just tidying it up. And once that has got almost leather hard, not quite leather hard, but almost leather hard overnight, then again tidying it up with the shredding tool and the ribs. And then again using the rubber rib just to tidy up the rim of the mug and the chamois leather. So I just tidy it up really nicely, and then I start to think about putting a foot ring on this mug. I'm going to put a foot ring on this one. So I make a coil of clay about the width of my pinky finger, I suppose, and then just position it around the base of the mug and cut it to length. And I usually cut the coil on a diagonal just to make sure that the join is nice and strong. Scoring the ends of the coil, painting them with a bit of slip, and then pressing them together really firmly and blending the clay in together so that you make a nice ring, solid ring of clay, like a little clay donut. Then I put it onto the base of the cup, base of the mug, and then I pinch it a little bit just to shape it a little bit. And then when I've pinched it into some shape, then I leave it to settle overnight just to let that foot ring firm up a little bit. And then next day you can see I've marked around with a needle tool the inside of the foot ring, and I'm scratching the surface with the serrated tool just to join the foot ring on. Once I've tidied up the foot ring and also smoothed out the side of the mug, I attach a handle in the way that I showed you earlier on and leave the mug to dry out before firing and glazing. And this is the mug that I've just shown you being made once it's been glazed. And this is the tankard shaped mug. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please do give it a thumbs up if you did and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. Bye!